Wonderful. All right. So, welcome to the youth collaboration session with Dee and I. Dee, you could take it away.
Thanks. Thanks, Angel. So we already kind of introduced ourselves a little bit, but if you could humor me in the chat, and tell us what is your go-to song that immediately uplifts your mood or puts you in a good mood, or even what's a song that you can think about that just puts you in a much better mood. Feel free to drop it in the chat. Yeah, we can add it to. I feel like since the pandemic, there's probably like 5 or 6 different playlists that I've like subscribed to. And I don't necessarily listen to, so I think I'll share some of those songs that I've collected from some of these answers. Don't Look Back in Anger by Oasis. I'm Just a Girl, no doubt. That's a classic. Ambition by Wale, for sure. Angie Stone, No More Rain. Nice, Angie Stone. The team has a practice starting each weekly meeting with the song. We have a great playlist. Oh, I like that idea. And I steal that. We'll continue to drop them in the chat if you feel comfortable doing so. We appreciate that. Next slide, please. So what do we do here at True Colors United? So we focus, our focus areas are in 3 different places. The first one is training and education, as well as technical assistance. So myself and Angel being your technical assistance providers, we work in the TA department. And currently we provide youth collaboration technical assistance. So all 33 YHDP communities, historically, we've worked on YHDP since its creation. And so most of our philosophy around youth collaboration and anti-adultism, as well as equity, is really provided at our organization through our training and education and technical assistance department. Our training and education, I'll provide some links at the end of this. If you're interested, you can go on to truecolorsunited.org and participate in our learning community, where a lot of our additional tools are held. Additionally, we have an advocacy department, as well as our youth action department. Our advocacy department really does our external work, so whether that's federal, state, or local. And our youth action department is comprised of our National Youth Forum on Homelessness, as well as our Youth Action Society. And so the forum is comprised of 20 young people from across the country that focus, their focus is on policy, practice, research, communications, as well as policy. And then the Youth Action Society is a space for all youth action boards that are interested in joining. They have a place to connect and also exchange ideas around sustainability and just kind of being able to check in about the state of the movement. Next slide. So some of our objectives with you today. So we're going to identify what do we mean when we say authentic youth collaboration, and why that is important to our work to end youth and young adult homelessness. We'll also provide a list of best practices for authentically engaging youth and young adults, provide a few concepts and ideas to consider when building out a framework of how to work with youth and young adults equitably. And then we'll also jump into some examples of adultism, what that is, and also how to address it. And then additionally, like I said, I'll provide some links at the end if you would like to supplement some of your learning with our online courses or any of our toolkits that are available on our website in PDF form as well. So that'll be our goals for today. Next slide. So I think we have pretty small enough group here. So I feel like if you're comfortable, please feel free to hop off of mute. If not, you can feel free to drop it in the chat box. But do you currently practice, have you practiced, or do you currently practice youth collaboration? And if so, what does that look like for you in practice? and you can come off the mute. You can drop it in the chat box. But this question is just meant to just get a baseline of where everyone is when it comes to what's your idea of youth collaboration and what does that look like in practice at your organization?
Yeah, this is Hadley. I my job before being at Better Health Together was actually working at the Boys and Girls Club with a teen program. So it was like super into youth engagement there. And in BHT specifically, we're like not quite as direct service, but we like want to really support all the partners that we're working with to make sure that they have youth at the table when we are having these conversations. And I was really lucky a few years ago to get to lead a design charrette for some youth. I didn't know what a charrette was. This is a new word for me. It's like when architects are trying to figure out how to like build a house and like build a building and develop something. And so we got to have a bunch of youth who are currently in the shelter system give feedback to architects directly on what they would hope out of a dream, permanent supportive shelter in Spokane. And that was a super fun, really awesome experience.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Somebody else?
Yeah, I was going to say, so being at VOA, we currently host the Youth Advisory Board here in Spokane. So they've been pretty well ingrained in most of all that we do. In recent years, the board hasn't been as large. We've had, 2 or 3 members. But like we've always included them in anytime like a new program was being developed and implemented, they were a part of that process and what that design would look like. Anytime there's like new ideas and like improvement projects in the community, those are always fielded to them and like to see like what they think and if they want to be involved in that implementation as well. So we've been fortunate to have that relationship and to be able to host the YABA at VOA. And that's definitely opened up a lot of opportunities for us to have like that mutual collaboration back and forth.
Yeah, thanks, Isaac, for that. Definitely agree. I think you can really see how that relationship is showing up.
Melissa. Hi, this is Virginia. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Virginia.
So previously, before my current role, I worked for Better Health Together back in, oh my goodness, I think this was 2015 or 2016. And I was working on the Hotspotters program, but beyond that, at the time, we had what was called the porch, and there were adults and youth that were sleeping on the porch. And so with the youth specifically, I was also working with Matt from the city on the youth advisory committee. And as well as when I was working with the youth, we discussed a lot of meeting them where they were at and what were their goals and what would they like. I could talk to them all day long about, do you want housing? Do you want this? Do you want to be connected to that? But really it was just, what programs do you think would work in your situation? And then of course, what programs or resources would you like to have on hand? And then currently, through Better Health Together, called the Healthy Kids Together program, which of course the Healthy Kids Together program helps with parents and children, particularly with getting connected to insurance through the Washington Health Plan Finder.
Got it. Thanks for that, Virginia. See your hand up, Adele, I think.
Prior to Better Health Together, I worked at the Martin Luther King Community Center. And so there's a youth program there. Basically with that program, it was after school, and Frida has a whole center where we would develop programs for them where they got to use technology as such as working with, oh my God, I can't even think of it. What's the thing? Drones. We had banks that came in and talked to them about not only resumes, but savings accounts, just things that most youth in the low income area wouldn't get. So they partnered with a lot of banks, a lot of other organizations to help the youth just create like in marketing, just do different things on the computer. So it was just trying to get their brain ready for the real world.
Yeah, thanks for that, Adele. Anyone else?
I'll say a little bit about what Index has done and is doing. Index is focused on accessibility because we work specifically with youth with disabilities. And we offer independent living skills training to kind of help them with like understanding how the world works, and you have to manage your money and um, personal hygiene, making sure you're eating the right foods, just a lot of these things that youth with disabilities aren't necessarily privy to, because I myself as a person with a disability was not privy to any of this information. So it's awesome to be able to provide back the resources that I didn't get. We also do game nights and mental health Mondays every month. I try to be as casual as possible for mental health Mondays because I feel like if we're just gonna be in like a mindset of like, oh, how can I help? How can I help? But not necessarily like being a person yourself, like I don't know. I feel like that wouldn't help. So I kind of just am trying to get on their level and um, get some information out of them in regards to what they would want in regards to being independent and how to reach their goals. Um, that's about it. Sorry,
Yeah,
I was rambling.
that's okay. I appreciate it. Thanks for that feedback. Yeah. Thanks for that. Anyone else wanna jump in? Any last ideas or comments on how you're currently practicing youth collaboration and what that looks like? No? All right. Well, thanks for chiming in. It's really good to hear. I think just a vast array of what youth collaboration looks like and how people are currently doing that at their organizations. So, yeah, I think that kind of is a good transition into our next slide. So, our philosophy around authentic partnership with youth and young adults sounds like a little bit of what we heard, and I think a little bit of some room where I think it's always helpful to kind of like grow into as well. And so we believe being very intentional about the decision making power that youth and young adults have in the work is the first step in building an authentic partnership with young folks. Understanding that youth and young adults have expertise and are experts of their own journey or of their own past that they've gone through, and that experience in turn has given them expertise, and so we should always be willing and able to invite that in and also uplift that expertise as well. And then finally, when asking young people to be involved in the work, hear them out, build a reciprocal relationship where you honor their experiences, allowing their experiences and ideas to inform the process. And I think that's really highlighted in the YGP space of asking for young people to not only show up with their with solutions, but also to lead in the creation of a new system where young folks are able to get their needs met and also impacting the end to youth and young adult homelessness as well. So, next slide. So the next couple of slides will just kind of take us through some ways that our young folks and also young folks in the community have identified as ways to avoid barriers when building that relationship between older adults and young folks. And the first one I think is compensation. Over the past 5 years, whenever I've gone into a community I think compensation is one of the first things that I usually look at. And that's just to make sure that like if young folks are being asked to show up into a space uh, with their lived expertise, as well as even if that's just showing up to advise or if that's in a much more equitable capacity. I think making sure that like we're compensating young people fairly and appropriately is really the first space when building out any type of reciprocal relationship. So compensating young folks for their time and effort, making sure they're being paid in ways that make sense for them. And so this is having flexible payment options. Ways to pay young people shouldn't just be through one method because that works great, right, for an organization or whoever's funding it, but making sure that we're able to offer direct deposit, cash. If people want like reloadable Visa cards or reloadable Mastercards, Cash App, Zelle, PayPal. Like these are all tools that a lot of young people prefer to have their payment methods in. And I think the easier we are, the easier we make it to adapt to multiple different methods of payment. I think that goes a long way with young folks in being able to show that we're able to meet their needs, specifically around compensation. I'd say also consider compensating emotional labor as well, understanding that young people that are showing up to this work might still also be very close to an experience of housing instability as well, and just the emotional toll that can take on someone. So also maybe think about offering in additional payment for emotional labor as well. Additionally, a lot of young folks have also brought up the idea of wanting to be involved in grant writing and learning how to grant write as well to also fund or sustain their youth action boards as well. And so I think there's opportunities for mentorship where a young person could be paired with an older adult and learn how to do grant writing or at least learn how to do budgeting for their youth action board. I think that also goes a long way with transparency and building trust. And then always identify new funding sources. So ensuring that we're always able to show the Youth Action Board where the funding sources are coming from, and that there's also a sustainability plan moving forward for whatever we're asking young people to work on, so that they're very clear on if the task that they're being asked for, how that's being funded, and also how does their compensation fit into that funding as well. Next slide, please. And so building trust is our next barrier to avoid. And so kind of like any relationship, right? In the beginning, building trust is essential for a working relationship to really grow or to move forward. And so once positive rapport is established, genuine collaboration can begin. And so I think being very considerate of like how we're building trust and what that looks like, I think, and also that like trust isn't built overnight in a lot of cases. And so really understanding the needs of young people that we're working with and also ensure that it's a true collaboration and that the power dynamics are named and called into the space and that we're doing what we can to ensure that the building trust is really an authentic process, right? And not just like a checkbox. Total understanding that if young people don't feel like trust has been broken or damaged, being open to conversations to hear that, being called into that space or kind of leaning into that idea that young folks might feel like trust was broken, and then also be open to repairing that trust as well for the relationship to be able to continue to move forward. And then we also always say, operate the speed of trust and equity. So understanding that so long as we're moving forward, really prioritizing trust building, and equity for young folks, I think that's the right speed to move at, especially when building new relationships or sustaining relationships, specifically when trust has been broken. Next slide. So meaningful engagement. One issue that always gets in the way of effective collaboration, I would have to say, um, is what we call showing engagement. And so this is when we're asking people to show up. They don't have any real task. They haven't been tasked with anything meaningful. They're being asked to just show up, just to tell components of their story, not necessarily being asked to show up in a way that allows young people to be part of solutions, that allow young people to um, hold spaces of leadership as well. And so I think a lot of times in collaborative engagement with young folks, that means a lot of different things, right? Like, yes, that means allowing young people to participate in the design of programming. Yes, that means allowing young people to identify what jobs, right, are lacking, and how those jobs need to be staffed, and then also hiring young folks to be in employed positions with youth serving organizations. I think like all of that is part of this meaningful engagement, right? And I think as even we can go a step further and really challenge ourselves to not only think about how we're engaging people, but how we're making space for, I think, young people to move into positions of leadership behind us as well. So really understanding that if we're just asking young people to show up just to say, this is how we engage with young folks, or even more specifically, if we're just doing that with marginalized youth and young adults just to create the impression of inclusion and diversity, we're getting far away from what it means to have meaningful engagement. We're building relationships with young folks. Autonomy. So young adults should have the freedom and agency to be leaders of their own lives, of their own decisions. And so I think like in housing or homeless systems, a lot of times young people have to really rely on case managers a lot of times to make a lot of decisions in their lives, and don't always have the choice to chime in or make decisions for themselves. And we find that in a lot of communities, a lot of young people just bring up the idea of wanting to have peers to participate in a lot of decisions that they make at young ages. So whether that's just allowing like housing choice, whether that's allowing peer navigators to participate in the youth system. I think we've heard like so much feedback about how young folks that are engaged in systems just want that ability to have freedom and trust, and also have that independence over making choices of their own lives, and not necessarily in that space of having that dictated to. And I think for the most part, a lot of our systems have moved away from that type. Oh, bless you. Um, uh, um, Sorry. So I think, yeah, a lot of systems have moved away from that kind of ideology that decisions have to be made for young people and not with young people. But I would say over the last 5 years, I think one of the highlights is seeing systems have gone from where young people were just asked or were given a complete product before they were asked to come in, but are now being um, identified to be a part of anything that's being created or developed at the beginning, and not when something's already completed. So I think this kind of idea of just like building in autonomy as like an equitable standard when engaging with youth and young adults is an important concept to remember. Yeah, in building out relationships authentically with young folks. And then sharing power. So this is my favorite one, I think, for YHCP. I think the goal of YHCP has always been to share power, right? Like, so for older adult partners, which have historically just been service providers, or those that are in management, or those that are in local government, right? Like, these are the ones that usually show up in a space with power. And young folks, the only power that they have sometimes is just their voice. And so really understanding that, like, the YHGP program was created so that young people can actually lead change, so that young people can actually also model, right, that they can collaboratively work in a shared power mindset to create solutions to end youth and young adult homelessness issues that impact them. And so young people should know and should feel and should be able to see that they have power in this work, and also in the ideas that they may have to end youth and young adult homelessness. So ensuring that youth serving systems are informed by youth and young adults, and reserve space for young folks to participate in voting, right? And whether that's on COC boards, whether that's just on organizational boards, or whether that's just within the Youth Action Board. Being able to hire folks, right? Being able to create job descriptions as well. And filtering through, right, who's being hired, where are these jobs going to, with the lens of, I'm a young person with lived experience, and this is what I know I need out of a system or a service. And so I think, yeah, making sure that I think YHGP gives us a great opportunity to share power, but I also think just adopting this idea, right, that like young folks with lived experience who are showing up to this work to actually affect change should also participate in some of the power that some people have historically held away from young folks in this work. And a few other things to look forward to. So, introductions, I think that, like universally, we've got here maybe like 3 years ago. Some people would have been like, "Oh, what are pronouns?" Right? But I feel like we've gotten a lot further now, where introductions show up equitably by being able for folks to introduce themselves, introduce their pronouns, and also call in any other identities that they want to hold up in the space as well. And a lot of times that also means racial identities as well, if people feel comfortable bringing that into the space, but really making sure that when we're collaborating with young folks, introductions have that equity built into, um, and that's just kind of like for trust building. Establish working agreements, collaborative curriculums, thank yous. We always have like a space at our organization, True Colors United, where we spend time just saying thank yous, which is just time to like thank your coworker or your colleague, just for kind of showing up. And I think a lot of times, a lot of young folks do this work and don't always hear thank you for a lot of the contributions that they give. And so being able to just, yeah, regularly hold thank yous for young folks that are showing up and being vulnerable in this space. And that takes a lot on of itself. So just showering with a thank you, I think, is also a tool to build trust and also just, I think, just kind of show common decency as well to young folks who are showing up. Parent empowerment, hearing a lot. Still, I think hearing a lot about how young people just prefer to be in community and share space with other young folks who have similar experiences. And so, whether that's through like peer navigation or whether that's through like peer outreach workers as well, I think there's definitely a benefit, right, to building out our systems that really embody this idea of peer empowerment. And then also skill shares as well. So I think creating like mentorship, uh, creating some type of sense of mentorship. I know a lot of young folks really look up to, right, some of the service providers who have been doing this work for a long time and would just like to be able to learn, right, some skills from these. And so whether these are like soft skills or whether these are just like instances to have a young person just kind of like, maybe informally just kind of shadow you, right? Like those mean a lot to young people, especially that are interested in doing more of this work. And so I definitely think building out or making that bridge to mentorship is definitely something that young people have asked for and also benefit from as well when that's done well. So next slide. I think that's my last slide. Collaboration on services. So finally, I think, so in order to collaborate with youth who participate in program services, it's important to honor their autonomy, make important decisions that impact their lives. So like I said, YHGP is a great example, or the Youth Homeless Demonstration Program is a great example of collaborating with youth and young adults. This allows young folks to not only create and develop solutions, but this also allows young people to learn how to make informed decisions for themselves, and the impact of being able to create and develop those decisions and solutions to any youth and young adult homelessness. And I also think this builds out what collaboration should actually look like. We get lessons learned from that, and then I think also during implementation, we'll really be able to see. Which will happen a little bit later this year, but I think we'll really get a sense of how strong this collaboration has been, and also any things that we should be mindful of, right, in this relationship between young adults and our older adult partners.
All right. Thank you, Dee.
No problem.
I'm battling a little cold, so I might cough a bit or clear my throat. Please excuse me in advance. So adultism, what do we mean when we're talking about adultism? What is it? Adultism describes a system of privileged attitudes and behaviors that adults have over young people. And it's driven by attitudes and behaviors that are based in assumptions that adults are better than young people, therefore entitles them to act upon or on behalf of youth and young adults without their agreement. So, really, adultism is about how we function with young people, what we believe about young people, and how we partner with them. right? And you can take a look at many different relationships that you've had or observations that you've had in your work working with youth and young adults, where I'm sure you might have seen negative attitudes and behaviors towards young people being perpetrated. And the goal with adultism is that we really are true partners, and that we're mindful of our language, we're mindful of our attitudes, and we're mindful of our behaviors. So often people ask, like, well, if adultism is about youth and young adults receiving oppression from older adults, what about ageism? And ageism is stereotyping and discriminating against people based on their age. And the difference between ageism and adultism is that ageism describes a system of privileged attitudes and behaviors from young people to elders, and adultism is from older adults to youth. So they're pretty much cousins in the oppression Olympics, right? You can have adultism, you can have ageism, and they kind of function on two different ends of the spectrum. So in common language, we often hear people speak not so friendly or negatively about youth and young adults. And these are some common terms that you may be familiar with. Respect your elders, they know better. I'm older and wiser, therefore I know more. You're childish. Young people are immature. Kids don't know what they're doing. Kids aren't prepared for the work. You're too old or not young enough, or not, you're too young or not old enough for this work. Children should be seen and not heard. Stay in a child's place, and the more you live, the more you know. Are there other kind of statements or terms that you all have heard that were adultist and could be used to oppress young people? Any other ideas, other things you might have heard in the past?
Oh, you're so wet behind the ears.
Ah, that's a good one. And we often hear these terms and people think they're harmless, but they have a major impact on the young people that we're working with. And so it's our responsibility to be mindful of our language just as much as we're mindful of our behaviors and our attitudes. So this is a moment for conversation. I just want to open up the floor to ask, how does adultism show up in your work? And then what is your comfortability with calling out adultism? You can answer one or both questions, and anybody can just jump in. Is anyone really comfortable in addressing adultism when you see it?
As a
This is
personal
Virginia.
experience, oh, who? Go ahead. Whoever
Virginia,
was talking.
yeah, Virginia, you want to go ahead?
I can do that. If I can keep my mute and mic working properly here. Sorry.
It's okay.
I I I feel that in a lot of ways it's, in my opinion, it's pretty comfortable to call out adultism um within the profession. I don't know if we always realize, and I know I definitely don't always realize though when adultism is showing up in work. Sometimes even after working with youth quite a lot, it's not always apparent, I think. But I feel that it's pretty easy to say, hey, you know, this is happening and we need to change this.
Right. Thank you for that. I would add too that a lot of times adultism happens behind closed doors and not in a public setting. So a lot of the adultist behavior that young people are subject to is sometimes done in secret, right? Because no one wants you to see how they're mismanaging their relationship with the young person or the young adults. So thank you for that. And I think there was one other person that had a comment.
I was gonna say something, but I forgot, so it's okay.
Okay, if you remember, you could put it in the chat. I can't see the chat right now, but you can drop it in the chat. That'll be helpful for everybody else. And I would say, encourage you all to really, after tonight, to ask yourself some questions. Are there places within the organization, within your agency, where you might see adultism? And can you be an ally, an older adult ally, staff person that can be an interrupter, right? And nobody has to know that you are an interrupter of adultism. It can just be your personal commitment to the work.
I'd add in Angel. There's something in the chat. So someone identified. I feel comfortable calling it out. It's a growing skill to notice adultism in the movement. Though our culture really so values professionalism that does not center a sense of belonging as well. So thanks for that, Hadley. That definitely resonates when we're thinking about adultism.
Absolutely. And one of the things that you can do to kind of counter that issue of not belonging is to be very intentional about creating spaces for youth and young adults to build community and have a sense of self and autonomy. That will help and support a sense of belonging with the young people. Is there anything else in the chat, Dee?
Nope, that was it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No problem.
So how do we identify and reframe adultism? Like many isms and systematic oppressions, adultism is learned early in life. We show up and we don't have any negative attitudes, beliefs, and concepts, but throughout our lives, we get information, we're part of systems, and they train our brains to think a certain way, right? So oppression that is experienced through adultism can be found all around and oftentimes is invisible until someone points it out. So back to my point about being an interrupter or disruptor to adultism when you see it, because often people don't recognize it because it's such a part of our culture. And the learned ideas and behaviors of adultism come with harmful effects, including creating and perpetuating divisive power imbalances and collaborative relationships between youth and young adults and older adults. So we must task ourselves with unlearning adultism. We must do the work to explore who we are, what we believe, and how we operate with young people. And this can be a part of your commitment to be a youth service provider, right? So make unlearning adultism a part of your professional efforts. Be very intentional with your work there. And as Dee mentioned, we have some resources at the end that I think will be very helpful for you to help unlearn some adultism. You also want to replace those old attitudes and beliefs and behaviors with new attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. So you really want to transform your mind as it relates to how you think about working with and partnering with young people to be true collaborators. And also, as we've mentioned before, take action when you see adultist oppression taking place. Speak up. Be brave enough to call your colleague in and invite them to have a conversation about behavior that you observe. Talk to your colleagues about how to be better partners. Share the resources that come across your desk with other folks. So that's how you create a system of change. And remember, every one of us has been the oppressed, the oppressor, and the ally. And you can always choose your role every single day. Are you going to be an oppressor who is implementing adultist behaviors upon young people? Are you going to be someone who addresses your internalized oppression that might show up for you? And how can you be an ally to someone else or a comrade in the work? Is there anything in the chat, Dee?
Adele has their hand up.
Oh, right.
So I'm reading this, and of course, I'm always going to be that one. So my question is, how does adultism differ from mentorship? And I'm saying that in the way of molding and training and assisting the youth and helping. How is this different?
Right. So with mentorship, it's a partnership. where you're learning from your mentee. The mentee is learning from the mentee is learning from the mentor is learning from the mentee. Often those are very much balanced relationships in the exchange. There's an understanding and a commitment to the relationship that the young person is there to learn and grow professionally, right? And maybe even personally. With adultism, it is providing information, resources, and tools with a heavy hand that is not inviting the young people to the table as partners. That's simply dropping information, dropping tasks, dropping directives onto young people, telling them what to do. In a mentorship capacity, it's a much, the word that's coming to my mind is an easy flow relationship where both parties have stepped in and decided this is how we want to work together. With adultism, you don't have any agreement. Young people often don't have any power, right? Because it's been stripped away. So I hope that's helpful.
It is.
Okay, great.
Autism is just that very strict adult person.
Right. And also, it can be a strict person, and it can also come from a person who's a great ally, but maybe they made a misstep one day, right? And said something offensive. Or maybe they didn't respond to young people's feedback on the work for changes. And so those changes were never made. Or maybe they don't show their best effort to identify compensation for youth and young adults, right? And we just keep saying we don't have the money, but we've never committed to identifying funds, right? So adultism, it can happen on a larger scale, like, you know, where there's a really harsh harm done, and it can also happen on the other end of the spectrum where the offense is more quiet and less likely to be able to point out. And so our jobs are to hone our skills in identifying adultism when we see it. And one good way to be able to do that is to talk with young people about their experiences with adultism. What have they experienced? And they inform your process. They can help inform your process.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I heard another voice. Is somebody going to say something? Okay. All right, so we'll move on. So, how do we tangibly fight adultism? We do it by consistently and intentionally making opportunities for authentic collaboration, removing barriers, building trust, making sure that young people have the information they need to do the work. We also do it by standing up and voicing our observations. We keep saying this because it's so important to be a disruptor and be an ally when we see the oppression occurring. Just like we'll speak up against other forms of oppression, patriarchy, sexism, homophobia, transphobia. We must stand up to adultism in the same ways. And we also need to understand that incorporating the intersectional nature of our identities and oppressions, particularly how they play out for youth and young adults in life. So we have to take into account the systems of oppression in which we function and the intersectionality of our identities and how the intersections of our identities can make us more victim to systems of oppression. I'll use myself as an example. As a Black queer woman, I have 3 automatic systems of oppression that could potentially impact my life. And as such, I have to be clear, like where I stand and what I believe in so I can advocate for myself. When we're talking about youth and young adults, it's our jobs to support them in learning how to call things out and do it with confidence and feel comfortable. And we also do that by creating environments where they know they can trust us. Right? So it's important to get feedback from young people, from youth and young adults about the work. You want to make sure that you're creating spaces for input and feedback to check yourself in your work. How are things going? How are our processes going? How are you feeling while we're doing this work? Are there any other supports that you need? These are conversations you should have on a regular basis with youth leaders that you work with. So you want to make sure you set youth and young adults up for success. You want to give them background information. You want to give them information on acronyms that you may use in your language. You want to talk about the local housing and homeless system and that network in the community. Make sure that they have everything they need to be meaningful thought partners at the table. One thing that we often do is we often invite young people to the table to make decisions and to give feedback, but we haven't prepared them to participate fully. And so that puts them at an automatic disadvantage. And that is an adultist behavior by way of neglect, right? So you've neglected to provide the information for young leaders to be set up for success. And that often happens very unintentionally, but it happens nonetheless. You want to create collaborative environments for input and feedback, making sure that folks know that input and feedback are a constant in your community and in the work that you're doing, and that you will always check in with each other about where we are in our process and where we are in our deliverables or activities, right? You want to make sure you have a constant loop of feedback for yourself. You want to offer multiple channels of feedback. So you might have surveys for young people, you might have guided discussions, you might do a listening session, you might do one-on-one conversations, but make sure you have multiple ways for young people to give you feedback, because all youth are different, all youth and young adults are different, and their needs will be different. And so our channels for feedback and input should meet their needs. Excuse me. You also want to set clear, realistic, and flexible deadlines, understanding that youth and young adults have lives outside of this work, and they often have pressing priorities or conflicting priorities. So you want to be flexible in how you establish your timelines for the work. Work with the young people to build out your timeline. Don't build a timeline and then give it to the youth and then ask them what they think. Work with them to create it so that you're all clear on how we're going to move forward for our tasks and activities. Lastly, you want to uplift the impact of their work. Often we work with young people, we ask them for their feedback, we get input, and then we don't come back to them and give them results of their input and feedback. People neglect to tell them how their feedback has helped change the system. So you always want to make sure that you're coming back to your youth partners with information on how their work has made a difference and the impact that they've made in the community. Dee, how are we looking in the chat?
Yep. Nothing in the chat.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So I mentioned listening sessions as a way to solicit feedback. Listening sessions are facilitated conversations where youth and young adults' ideas and suggestions. Sorry, it's been a long day. Suggestions are uplifted in an essential way. So adult partners, they come into the space with the youth and young adults. The young people talk about their experiences. They give feedback. They give expertise. They give information. And then the adult partners are completely silent and do not participate. They are only silent observers. And the goal of listening sessions is to create a safe environment for young people to talk about what they think, feel, and know without interruption from adult partners. And it also reinforces a sense of community around the young people. We support you, and your voice and your beliefs matter. So 5 things that you can do to have a successful listening session if you were to host one is to make sure you build trust with the young people while you're in the session. So lay the groundwork for how the session will run, talk about the older adult partners in the room, establish some norms for the day, make sure that you've created and established a safe space to begin the listening session. Go in with an open mind. You never know the gems that are going to come out of a listening session, and you might be surprised at what what the youth and young adults might say. So keep an open mind, and remember, the listening session is about the young people in the room. You also want to identify and reframe adultism if it shows up. If you set up your listening session from the beginning with some really great norms for how we're going to function for the time and the space, then you should not experience any adultism. But if you do, identify it, name it, and reframe it in the moment. You also want to make sure you're engaging in course and active listening, that the youth and young adults in the space feel respected and they feel like that you are actually there to hear them. And lastly, you want to be specific in your conversations with the youth and young adults in the listening sessions. You want to make sure that your questions are clear. You want to make sure that your instructions are clear. And you want to make sure that you have a good way to close the container. So a common question that we get is, what kind of support do youth and young adults need in this work? Well, they need a few things that would be helpful. And these are not exhaustive lists, but these are the things that we've learned in our work with YHDP and other communities. So young people need authentic partnerships. They need us to undo adultism. They need equitable relationships and power sharing in these relationships. There's a need for clarity of roles and responsibilities. You want to make sure you're always very clear with youth and young adults about the work that they are here to do and the responsibilities that they've been handed. So you want to have explanations for work. You want to have guidances for processes or practices. You want to give descriptions for what you're going to do. I mentioned earlier that you want to make sure youth and young adults understand acronyms. So you want to make sure that they're well equipped to be at the table. There's also tools and trainings that youth and young adults need. They benefit from trainings on hard and soft skills, professional development and professional investment in their lives, mentoring and coaching support. And then lastly, youth and young adults need to be able to understand the work. They need to know what they're walking into before they get into a conversation, a meeting, a public event. Make sure that you give them the appropriate information and don't just ask a young person to participate and show up without the tools they need to be productive counterparts. You also want to talk about your local landscape and your local homeless system and give this information to the young people so that they can be meaningful partners at the table. Dee, can I hand this off to you?
You sure can. Thanks, Angel. So what are other Gabs doing? So you didn't ask, but you might want to know. And so something that a few things that I'd like to share that other youth action boards are doing specifically around compensation. I think every youth action board that I have this round, we've had to address compensation in one way or another. I will say, a lot of places have been able to be super creative, and that is being able to utilize multiple different forms of paying young folks. And so, whether that's just having flexibilities around how young people are being paid, whether that's direct deposit, cash, check, uh, reloadable gift cards, whether that's some type of online app that allows you to transfer money instantly. Those all have been working great, and also at a standard of at least $25 an hour for all Youth Action Board members. Some YABs we've been able to kind of get a little bit higher, right? A little bit above that number, but I will say compensation is one thing we've been able to really work on. And something else I think this round has like uniquely been able to kind of walk us through is the amount of young people that's really been able to participate in not only the planning, but also have had like such a hand in developing the coordinated community plan and also showing up to either participate in the RFP, and whether that's just screening or reviewing applications, whether that's creating the scoring rubric, whether that's been participating on the RFP committees that are going to actually interview applicants. Young people have really been empowered to really show up and lead in the YHGP space that I think we always don't get to see every round. And so I've been really proud, especially this round of the Spokane YAB, that's really kind of been just headfirst into really leading as much of this work as they've had the capacity to do so. Next slide.
Awesome. Thanks, Dee.
Yeah.
All right. So we talked about some resources that we have for you. We have a few resources at True Colors United. that we want to leave you with, and you'll get these slides later. But we have a racial equity toolkit, which is one of our newest toolkits that released this year. And it's a great tool to help you learn about and understand racial equity and the importance of racial equity in your work with young people. It takes a historical context and applies it to racial equity. So it's a really great tool. I encourage you to check it out. We also have a youth action toolkit that supports organizations in building youth action in their communities. So that toolkit is one of our kind of flagship toolkits there. So please check that out. There is an inclusion toolkit, which talks about how to make your spaces more inclusive and more inviting for LGBTQ young people. We have a youth collaboration toolkit, which talks about the practices and framework of youth collaboration. Many of them you've heard this evening in tonight's presentation. And lastly, we have a project management toolkit for communities. And this is a tool that we developed to help communities be able to manage projects in partnership with young people at the table as equitable collaborators. So all of those tools are available via our website, truecolorsunited.org. Oh, go ahead, Dee.
Yeah, I also dropped, so I dropped some links in the chat. So the first link is the link to truecolorsunited.org, and that'll take you directly to all of the toolkits Angel is showing you right there. I also dropped in the link to the Youth State Index. And so if you are interested in seeing Washington's report card, it's changed over the last year. So yeah, I'd encourage you to stop by and see that. And then I also put the link in there to our learning community, where we have, in addition to the toolkits, we also have actual video courses that you can take. And so, yeah, I'd invite you to go over. Everything is free. Our toolkits are free. Our courses are free. You just have to sign up for an account, enter your email, create a password, and then you'll have access to all of our resources on our website.
Great. Thanks, Dee.
Yeah.
Another resource that we have in the learning community is the Equity Hub. And this is where you come to learn about all things equitable as it relates to LGBTQ youth and homelessness. So same thing, go to the learning community and create an account and you can log right on in. And this is the state index that Dee just mentioned, which is which is a document or state index ranks each state's laws and policies as it relates to youth and young adults and homelessness. So yes, check the state index out as well.